Good morning, members. This is the last Adult Social Care and Communities Scrutiny Committee of the current session. Welcome to you all. I hope that we'll have an interesting meeting, although it may be, hopefully, a short meeting this morning, but then again, famous last words could apply. When you wish to speak, could you please raise your hand on the WebEx screen? And if you think you're being ignored, please wave your hand. Thank you. Now, first of all, do we have any apologies for absence?
We have no apologies for absence, Chairman.
Good. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Good. Minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of January. Does anyone wish to propose that these are a true and accurate record? Thank you, Andrew. And seconded by Steve Robinson. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll accept those as being true and accurate record. We now move swiftly on. I'd like to invite Sarah Scott, our Director of Adult Social Care and Public Health, to give the Public Health Report, and they appear on pages 13 to 28 of our papers. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I think first of all, what I'll talk you through the latest dashboard for the COVID data to give you an update of what's going on. So Joe's very kindly going to share her screen. So if you just flick through, Joe, please, to slide number 4, and this will show our early warning indicators summary. So on here, you can see at the top, we're now down to medium to low incidence of 30.5 cases per 100,000. That was in several hundreds a few weeks ago. So our rate has dropped considerably. Great news. And you can see there underneath that in the data we have now compared to 2 weeks ago, it is nearly a 30% decrease in our number of cases, which again is really good news. So to talk you through the district table beneath, again, we're seeing a decrease in our rates across the districts, but you'll see for Gloucester, in terms of the percentage changes, it shows 4.7% increase. Now, we have to be really careful now because we're down to such low numbers. That's a difference of 2 cases. 45 cases the week before last and 43 cases in the last week. So we need to be careful when we see headlines or how this is portrayed in the public, because a difference of 2 cases is not particularly something that we're concerned about, but it can cause quite big fluctuations in our percentage changes. But generally, everything's going in the right direction. We will continue to see these slight sort of wobbles in the data because that's just a fact of the spread of COVID across our communities. You'll see also that Stroud has the highest rate of cases at 50. We've looked into this, and this is mainly due to a few relatively small care home outbreaks and some general community transmission. We're aware of all the care home outbreaks, and we've been involved in them, and we're talking to the homes, and there's nothing we're particularly concerned about. But as I said, we will see a little bit of fluctuation across the districts, and as hopefully our cases continue to decrease. So we go on to slide 5 then, Joe. This just talks about our positive cases, and you can see at the bottom there, right-hand corner, there's the green bar chart where we're seeing that the high number of cases in Stroud, and Cheltenham is also slightly above that. Bar chart by age group and gender, and the pattern hasn't really changed much in the last few months. So we're still seeing adults of working age generally having the highest proportion of cases. If we scroll down to slide 6, we can see confirmed cases by district and what we call medium super output area. So these are our county divided into 75 different areas with around 7,500 to 8,000 people living in each. The darker the colour, the higher the rate of cases. So we can see there in Stroud, I think that might be Dursley, the one that's particularly red. We're seeing a high number of cases there, but the proportion of cases moves around quite a lot. So what might be high in Stroud this week could be the Forest next week, or could be the Cotswolds. Again, but as you know, we look at the data 7 days a week, and we're working with our integrated brokerage team and our schools and to try and follow up cases in care homes and educational settings, because that's our most common setting for cases. So if we go down then to slide 7, this looks at the R number and the growth rate, and you'll remember that we can only have the R value down to a regional level. It doesn't really tell us much if we take it to a level beneath the region, and the Southwest has an R rate at something between 0.6 and 0.8, which is good news. The only place with an R of around 1 is North Eastern Yorkshire. We know there are much higher rates of COVID and some stubborn areas of transmission that colleagues that are working on. So what we want to see really is the R rate coming down even further. But that is good news at the moment. We scroll down then to slide 8. This compares Gloucestershire with our geographic neighbours. And on the table towards the right-hand side of the graph, you can see Gloucestershire's at the bottom there with our rate of 30.3. And all of our neighbours pretty much have higher rates than us. Now, what we have to be mindful of is that boundaries, so we just have to be careful, and we're keeping a close eye on this. And as you know, I work really closely with the Directors of Public Health across the Southwest, and we've also made links with the local authority public health departments and the surrounding local authorities to the east, west and north as well, just to make sure that we're all keeping an eye on each other's data. But at the moment, that shows a positive picture for Gloucestershire. Slide 9 talks about excess deaths, and we talked about this in some detail, I think, at the joint HOSC and Adult Social Care and Community Scrutiny meeting a few weeks ago. And we are sourcing some data on excess deaths. But I think what you'll see on this graph, and I've shown this to you many times before, is the blue line, the number of deaths from COVID. And this is anyone that had a positive test from COVID and died within 28 days. And as you can see, we had a bit of a peak in January, and that's come down considerably since. And the red line, which is the best comparison, is the 5-year average from all causes of death. So that's pretty much the number, or the rate of deaths per 100,000 we would expect to see at any point during the year. And it allows us to take into account deaths from seasonal issues like flu, but also how we tend to have different patterns of death around bank holidays and things like that. So it's the best comparison. So you can see there that we're actually beneath. So on slide 10 and 11, we've got some vaccination data, which I think obviously in Gloucestershire, we're working very closely with our NHS colleagues. We're doing really well in Gloucestershire, and just before we were talking about some of our positive experiences of our vaccination programme. But so we can see here that 99.6% of Gloucestershire's over 80 population have received their first dose. That's the third highest rate in England, which is great news. And we can see there we've got in the yellow box the cohorts 1 to 4 in terms of the age groups there. And some of you might note there that in the 75 to 79 age group, we've actually managed to vaccinate 102.9% of our population of that particular age. Now, this is because we're using denominators for this group that are from resident population. So this is the data that we use in local authorities. And because of the complexity of the vaccination programme and the fact we're having to then invite clinically extremely vulnerable people, which come from GP lists, which use a slightly different denominator, their GP registered populations, the number of working through that at the moment, both at Gloucestershire level and are presenting way possible. The next few weeks, see some things.
I think you're breaking up a little bit, Sarah. I don't know if you want to turn your video off. Sorry.
I'll turn my video on. So you might see for the next few weeks that we are purporting to have vaccinated more than 100% of a particular age group. And that's to do with the denominator, and we're working through some of those issues. So the final slide is a Southwest vaccinations comparison. So it compares us with the other, what we call integrated care systems. Gloucestershire is its own integrated care system. So with our data is highlighted in bold in blue along the bottom, and shows our percentage uptake of the first dose and second dose of the first 4 cohorts in the JVCI prioritisation list. Now, as we go through, we'll see more data coming through. We're now very nearly through cohorts 5 and 6, and the invitation letters have gone out for the cohorts 7 to 9. That's the age, those aged 50 to 60. So those letters, 50 to 64, that's groups 7 to 9. So those letters have gone out now and people are being invited. So I'll pause there just to see if there are any questions.
I'm sure there must be questions. Who's going to be first with a question? Are we using electronics? Ian, you raised your hand electronically.
Okay. I would like to ask a question about the vaccinations, Sarah. Clearly catching 7,000 care staff for vaccinations that you've mentioned in your write-up, it'll be very challenging, especially for those working outside of care homes. Can you say how successful you're being in catching this cohort? And it would be quite useful to have a regular update on that, please. That's my first question. Thank you.
I don't have any of the data at the moment available to give you an update. The 7,000 letters we've issued are in response to people asking for a letter. So we went to all the initially the care homes staff were offered a vaccination with the over 80s, and we're just going back to the care homes now to check that we reached everyone. And I know we didn't. So there's an opportunity to offer catch-up vaccinations to those staff in care homes. The broader health and care workforce is much more difficult because the national definition has so we've included a wide range of people in that group, including everyone working domiciliary care, those who might be personal assistants paid for by personal health budgets. There are, for example, some people involved in dealing with the deceased, because that was also included. So the 7,000 relates to the number of people that requested a letter to take for their vaccination. So I suspect the denominator is actually much bigger, but we don't have a lot of data in terms of how big that social care worker population is. So we're just going around again to all the organisations and all the avenues we use to reach this group to ask them again if there's anyone else. I suspect a large proportion of the 7,000 have come forward for their vaccination. But I will include further updates in my report to the next scrutiny.
Thank you. I'll ask my second question later. Thank you.
Okay, morning, Terry.
I've had my hand up some time.
Hello, who's next to ask a question?
I think we've got Councillor Hilton asking and Councillor Robinson. You might need to turn your video off, Councillor Hilton, because you're breaking up a little bit.
Jeremy?
Well, I'd sooner. Can I ask about the reason why people are being now sent to Melbourne to have their vaccination? I was fortunate to go to Churchtown, brilliant service there. I know people in Gloucester have been going to Rosebank, but I've heard of 2 or 3 people now who've been offered appointments in Melbourne, which seat is 20 miles away. So I just wonder what the logic is behind that. Is it because we're at capacity at these other 2, or we're going to start work on the second vaccinations, and therefore we need to move people somewhere else to get the first?
I think I need to be clear that I'm not necessarily leading the rollout of the vaccination programme in Gloucester. It's an NHS-led programme, and the Senior Responsible Officer is Steve Hams from the Acute Trust. I can attempt to answer your question, but I think if the detailed questions about the vaccination programme, they have to go to HOSC or have to go to NHS colleagues for a response. There is an issue at the moment where a whole tranche of national letters have gone out for those in cohorts 7 to 9, so those aged 50 to 64, where they were initially told to go to one of the regional mass vaccination centres. Now, as you'll know, we don't have a mass vaccination centre in Gloucestershire, but we do have 10 excellent primary care sites run by our colleagues in primary care that are very efficient, and most have a throughput of around up to about 1,000 people a day, which is proving really, really efficient. The CCG, with their primary care colleagues, are pushing out text messaging and messaging to everyone in cohorts 7 to 9. So if you don't want to go to a regional vaccination centre, you can wait for your invitation from your primary care network. So that is still the main route for how we will vaccinate our population in Gloucestershire. using this route within the 10 primary care network sites. I think it is unfortunate that the national letters come out and perhaps create a little bit of confusion, but I know colleagues in the NHS are working hard to try and issue messages to try and give people the right information. I know people that have been called to Malvern, some have been called to Ashton Gate, but you can go to Malvern if you wish to go and have your vaccine, and you can get an appointment. That's entirely within your gift. But if you wait, you will get an invitation to the primary care network site, and the progress is really quick. Obviously, I think it's dependent on vaccine availability, which is one of the things NHS colleagues are working on this week, which is a nationally dictated flow.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is for somebody to go to Melbourne and they'll probably get their vaccination earlier. And I know somebody who's been offered an earlier appointment at Melbourne and decided to go there rather than wait to a couple of weeks later to get their appointment locally. But there is some confusion, and I think we need to let people know that they can wait if they want at the local level. But you know, we are doing exceptionally well. It's been very efficient so far. So it was a surprise to learn that people were being posted to 20 miles away.
Okay.
Just to reassure the committee, I know NHS colleagues are working hard to make sure that everyone has the right information. So it's not something sadly that's in my gift to change, but NHS colleagues are working to ensure people have the right information as soon as possible.
I think now Councillor Steve Robinson.
And that's obvious. Steve, good morning again.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah, for your explanation regarding the Stroud area. I was concerned when I'd seen that it hadn't dropped to the same percentages as the other districts. And you say it's mainly due to care homes. So can you assure me that these care homes, that the residents have all had the vaccine or have been offered the vaccination, have taken it up, sort of thing?
All care home residents have been offered, and they were offered that very early on in this year. I think it's worth noting you can still catch COVID even if you've had vaccination. What the vaccination will do is it will dramatically reduce the chances of you becoming seriously ill or dying from it, which is really good news. And we know that a large proportion of our most vulnerable residents live in care homes. So we're still seeing maybe 10 care home residents a week testing positive for COVID. And that might be because they haven't had the vaccination. They might have not had a good immune response, or they might just be catching it and it's very, very mild. So the feedback I've had from the care home outbreaks across the county is that actually we're not seeing the severity of illness that we were seeing perhaps before Christmas. We're still seeing around 40 cases in care home workers a week, which indicates we have more work to do on care home, on social care workers to promote uptake. This is an offer. We can't force people to have it. So we're doing quite a lot of work, as you'd seen in my report, around inequalities and myth busting with different groups in our communities to enable them to understand the benefits of vaccinations so they can make an informed decision. So we're very alert to this. I think I'd also say that unlike in the early waves of the pandemic, care homes now. Is there feedback? I can see Dave squinting. Should I turn off my video? I think someone might not be on mute actually, because there's quite a lot of feedback that I can hear.
I think, Chairman, do you want to go on to mute as well? I think that might be the problem. Carry on, Sarah.
Better. So yes, well, I think we'll continue to see cases, and that we're keeping an eye on that. But we are testing care home workers each week with PCR tests and the lateral flow tests, so that they're getting tested very frequently. And so we're looking for it, so we're finding it, and obviously we're finding it with people that don't have any symptoms at the moment. So I think this is something we're going to continue to live with for a very long time to come. But the more people we have vaccinated, the less the likelihood of transmission. And we know now that there's quite a lot of evidence for reduction in transmission when you have 2 doses of the vaccine as well. So that's good news.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm pleased to say that my mother-in-law, who's 101, is having her second one tomorrow at Beecher's Green. So yeah, So they're rolling out the second one now in Stroud. Thank you.
Good to hear, Steve.
I think you need to unmute now, Stephen.
Steve, that's wonderful. Please send her our best wishes for a good day tomorrow.
Could I ask everyone to lower their hands if they've asked their question on the raised hand system, please?
Andrew?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and make this a question, but I just wanted to ask Sarah to share with her colleagues in public health and across the NHS trusts the thanks and appreciation of the elected members on this committee for the outstanding work in these areas. I appreciate that vaccination work is being done by one of the trusts, but a lot of public health people have played a part, and so too Gloucester Fire Rescue Service. I think the fall in numbers across the county is seriously good news, and the fall in the infection rates in Gloucester City are nothing less than spectacular. And so I just want to place on record my thanks as an elected member for the City of Gloucester. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. Joe, who's next?
I can't see any raised hands. If anybody wants to draw it, oh, Councillor
Ian
Harman,
wants to ask another
Councillor
question.
Doby and Councillor
Tim.
Harman.
And then Tim, yes.
Ian first.
Sorry, can I just ask another COVID-related question,
Surely.
which isn't anything to do with vaccination? I'd just like, Sarah, for you to comment on how track and trace is going on the national and also the local level. How is the interface, indeed, and handoff working between the national and local track and trace? The local, of course, being done by your staff in the public health system. What's the respective success rate of track and trace of Gloucestershire Public Health against Dido Harding's national team? Could you say a few words on that, please?
As colleagues may remember, we work very closely with the National Test and Trace Service. We get a daily line list of every person who's tested positive in Gloucestershire, so we're able to review that along with what we know about outbreaks and common areas or places of infection. So we've identified sort of common sources, if you like. Before lockdown, we were able to ask our environmental health colleagues to go and visit certain shops or workplaces where perhaps we were picking up the odd case of infection, just to give some advice about COVID safe work practices and COVID guidance. We also entered into a contact tracing partnership with PHE and the Test and Trace Service in October last year, and this was finally rolled out county-wide in early December. So what happens now is when you test positive, the national system has 24 hours to contact you and start your contact tracing work. If they're not able to contact you, then your details get passed to the local team, which is our team within the council. I've not got any data directly in front of me, Ian, but I can certainly provide it after the meeting, because I'd have to go into some databases and dig it out for you, and I wouldn't want to do that on a live committee stream. But we have, I think what tends to happen is those that are willing to really openly, readily willing to engage with the test and trace system tend to do so in the first 24 hours. So we tend to get the people that are perhaps slightly less willing to engage. So the team have demonstrated real tenacity and diligence in terms of trying to access people to understand, well, who are your contacts and who might you have been in contact with. So that work is ongoing. But perhaps I could provide Joe with a short briefing in terms of our success rate in terms of contacting people after the meeting. But just to assure members that that's ongoing. We are now looking to move to something called enhanced contact tracing, where instead of going back 2 days prior to testing positive, we'll go back 7 days to really try and understand where the person might have caught it. And now the rates have decreased. Contact tracing should be even more effective in sort of breaking those chains of transmission and reducing rates even lower. And I think contact tracing for COVID will be part of my team's role for easily the rest of this year, if not going into 2022.
Thank you.
Stephen, you're on mute. You need to unmute and mute.
Tim Harman, then Terry Hale.
Yeah, thank you. I just, as cabinet member, just wanted to cast a couple of comments. Can I echo Andrew Gravell's thanks to everybody involved with the whole activity, really, particularly around the vaccination. And I was also delighted to see the spectacular fall in cases in Gloucester, which was concerning. We should remember that a great deal of effort went into the local community there. I think also Sarah might confirm working with the BAME community. I think our own Councillor Sanchez Patel had a role in that. Going on also, just to say, of course, yesterday was the first day significantly in the roadmap where we saw schools returning. I went out walking yesterday and it was quite almost a party atmosphere. They were excited children, rather relieved looking parents, which I thought was significant. So that was good news, and you know, I'm delighted we got there. The other change, something Sarah might like to comment on, is obviously it's now possible for residents in care homes to have one nominated visitor, PPE and testing. And I think we'd all welcome that in terms of improving the mental health of residents. So yesterday was an important day, and you know, I know the huge amount of work that's gone in both into the schools and the care homes to make this a success.
Yes, it was the first landmark on the roadmap, wasn't it, yesterday? And school children really did seem to enjoy going to school. Yes, it was good. Terry Hale.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to ask Sarah, I've had two residents come to me with their elderly parents went into hospital with unrelated COVID condition. But when the death certificate was signed, COVID was put on as the form of death. Can anybody explain that to me, please?
It's quite difficult for me to comment on the specifics of someone's death, but if they went into hospital with non-COVID reasons, the only reason COVID would have been put on the death certificate is if they had caught COVID. So I suggest that the individuals perhaps go back to the hospital, perhaps through the PALS service, and request some further details about the circumstances around their relative's death. So if my understanding is if COVID is on the death certificate, it has to have been a factor in their death. So I would suggest going back to the hospital to seek some further clarity, if that would be of comfort to them.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Sarah.
Stephen, you need to unmute, Chairman. Sorry, we didn't get that, Stephen. Could you repeat
I said,
that?
does it mute automatically?
No, but because of feedback, when you finish speaking, you need to mute yourself and then mute and then release it. Each time you finish speaking, if you can mute and then connect again.
Thank you. Yes, Sarah, would you pass on our sincere thanks and to all your staff in public health for a fantastic effort in keeping this thing under control. It really is good, and we so do appreciate what's happening at the moment. Can I just ask a question? We've got good vaccination rates, and yet and our COVID rates are going down. Are those two factors correlated? The more people you vaccinate, the less people will in fact get COVID.
Broadly speaking, there is a correlation, yes. What we will see, and we're seeing in the hospital, is we're seeing less people becoming seriously ill with COVID, which is great news. Our numbers of deaths from COVID have reduced significantly, which is really good news. What happens next is really dependent on how many people choose to get the vaccination, and it is a choice. We cannot force people. So that makes it really important that we ensure we've got the right information out there for the right groups in our communities to make an informed choice. So we know that no vaccination is 100% effective, but we know it's useful in trying to prevent those chains of transmission. So initially, when the vaccines came out, they were the primary aim was to reduce the number of deaths and reduce the number of hospitalizations. And now there is evidence it actually reduces the level of transmission as well, which is really good news. I'm still planning with my team to have a COVID response function until the end of March, probably into the next financial year. because there will be some people that can't or won't have the vaccination. At the moment, it's not on offer to children and young people. So we will still see COVID circulating in our communities. But if we have what we call herd immunity, so a significant proportion, so over 75% of our population vaccinated, then we should see that protection then for the more vulnerable, and we shouldn't see high levels of hospitalisation, and we shouldn't see high numbers of deaths. It might be that we do still see a few people who need to go to hospital, and we might sadly see some deaths, but they should be much lower than what we've seen over the last year. So I think that it's good news, early, really positive signs of going back to some degree of normality, but I think we've got a long way to go yet. And a lot of it depends on our behaviour through these key milestones in the roadmap. So cautiously optimistic, I would say.
Well, hands, face and space still apply, don't they, in a major way? Yes, thank you. Now, Sarah, on to our adult social care report. This is part 2 of your presentation.
Okay, so I think like with the public health report, I've assumed everyone has read it. Do you want me to take you through the brief highlights? And there's one thing that probably isn't very clear in there that I perhaps will draw to your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. The first bit of the paper talks about the work of the Adult Social Care Directorate to help with what we call system flow, to help people flow out of the hospital and go home as soon as possible with the best support that they require. And at the last meeting, we talked about something called designated settings, whereas a health and social care system, we had decided we wanted to designate a particular part of a care home to receive COVID positive patients within their 14 days. Now, this was quite a long piece of work. It involved signing off from CQC, negotiations with the provider, and a whole other enhanced set of infection prevention control measures. These beds were only, in fact, used for 12 days. So we then found that because our numbers of COVID cases dropped considerably, the hospital then was under less pressure, and we didn't need these beds. So it's turned now, we've flipped them back to green. So they are beds now. They're still beds in our system. We're still paying for them, but they hold people that are either don't have COVID or are after their 14 days of being infectious. So I know there's a lot of discussion about this at the joint meeting, but I wanted just to provide an update that we're no longer taking people who are infectious with COVID out of hospital into these beds. They're now what we call green beds.
That's a good sign, isn't it? That's a good sign.
It is a really good sign, a really good sign. I don't think we shouldn't be in a position where we ever need them again if the vaccination programme does what it needs to do. But we are in, you'll see in my public health report, there's some information about the variants of concern there. And we are where we are, but we're learning all the time about COVID. But we're in a good position, I think, in Gloucestershire. So I think everything else in the report is fairly self-explanatory, but I'm really happy to take any questions from committee members on the adult social care report.
Thanks, Sarah. Who would like to ask Sarah a question? Ian?
I'd like to ask a question about care home pods. The County Council, as you'd noted, made an offer to all care homes in Gloucestershire of £3,000 each towards creating these care home pods, which will enable visits. But that was 3 months ago. I just wonder what the take-up had been, and has this actually been overtaken by events? Since I think it's right, correct me if I'm wrong, that residents can now have a designated visitor anyway. So what's the status of the care home pods, please?
Yes, I think the designated visitor was from yesterday.
Yeah.
So the last update I had, and I will provide a further update, that we'd had over 75 organisations who requested the funding. So some organisations have more than one home in Gloucestershire. It has taken some time to find a way to get the money, to make the decision to get the money to the care homes. And in the roadmap, it very clearly states that from the 8th of March, we can have one designated visitor per care home resident. But of course, lots of care home residents have big families. They might have various number of children who want to visit, might have grandchildren, might have friends. So what this means is they can have one designated visitor who can go in and hold their hand and have the testing and the PPE. But the pods do still serve a purpose because you might want to have multiple visitors. And the roadmap did reflect that. So we do think there is still a role for the pods, and there will be for some time to come, because you don't need them to go through the testing. It might be someone that perhaps isn't very tolerant setting it might be, you might want to invite grandchildren to come and visit, to wave at granny or grandpa and have a conversation in a COVID safe way.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify that, Sarah? What you're saying is you've got your one designated visitor who may bring along the whole family, but they have to stay in the pod.
Whole family might be pushing it slightly. I think this is all dependent on the rules of the individual care home.
Okay.
But in theory, my understanding of the guidance is that you can. I need to go back. It came out late on Thursday. I've read it, but I need to reread it to properly absorb it. But you have the one designated visitor, as you've described, who goes into the care home, and then you can have other visitors that come in and out of the pods. And the pods have to be cleaned in between visits, so you perhaps might not want all 10 members of a family piling in there. Each care home will have its own rules as to how that works. But in theory, you could have multiple visitors for a care home resident. But of course, there might be one pod per care home. There might be 30 residents. They're going to have to schedule them in.
Yeah.
You'll have to talk to your own care home about how it's working.
And people cannot transfer from a pod visitor to a designated visitor. It's the permanent designated visitor, isn't it?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah. Next question, please. No one?
I think we've got no hands raised. I thought we had, but we haven't.
One?
Brian, this is Brian. I've got my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Brian.
Sorry, Brian. Fire away.
Okay. I was at a parish council meeting last night, and the concern was raised. We were talking about the fact that we try and keep people out of care homes as much as possible, and also the impact of people in the care homes, of the fact that they haven't been able to have the visitors that they normally get. And I just wondered whether any work had been done to assess the impact of loneliness, either on people who are cared for at home, and therefore don't necessarily see that many people, or also the impact of the restriction on visiting during the COVID period, when many of them haven't had any visitors at all, and whether we had any lessons to learn from how we manage loneliness in older people and the impact that has on their overall health.
There are a number of questions in that, Brian, weren't there? So I think the first thing is that we don't necessarily try and keep people out of care homes. I think care homes are a really important part of our offer, our adult social care offer. I think the approach we take to the adult single programme is to try and to not assume that a care home is the first option, that we explore with the individual and their family whether they might be able to stay in their own home with a package of care, and some other options, explore some other options. So we are seeing, as a result of that 3-year approach, a slight reduction in the number of people that go to care homes. But that's because we're able to support people to stay and be independent in their own homes for longer, which everyone tells us is what like. So the issue about loneliness and isolation, we've not done any research locally, partly because there's been a lot done at a national level. So some of the bigger charities like Age UK have done some research. There's quite a lot written about the impact of people living in care homes, and there's been a huge lobby nationally to try and change the guidance around care home visiting. It still ultimately depends on the care home manager, because they're responsible for the health, safety and welfare of their residents and their staff. So we haven't done anything locally. I think we also haven't, we're still very much in response mode, I think, as a system. So whilst the numbers are reducing, we are still very much responding. So I think we haven't done anything yet on the impact of loneliness and isolation in care homes. That's not to say we wouldn't in the future, but I'm aware of some national guidance. Would you like me to try and find some to send to you?
Yes, that would be useful, but I'd also be interested, when you say you may do some, I'd like you to be a bit more positive. I think it's an important area that we should be looking into, because mental well-being for older people is probably critical, as much as the physical well-being. And I think we should be making sure that we have that in our front of mind and not as an afterthought.
I'm not suggesting it's an afterthought. I think the issue is, at the moment, I've got a team that has been in response mode for a year now. I've got people that are working in shifts 7 days a week to respond to the incident, if you like. I think we have primarily focused on people's physical well-being because that was what was asked of us nationally, regionally and locally. I completely accept that mental health is as important as physical health, but at the moment it's difficult to confirm when we would have the capacity to undertake a piece of work about the impact of loneliness and isolation on what is a very broad group of people, those living at home with support, those living at home on their own and those living in care homes. So I think I'd have to take that away to understand with the team what the art of the possible is, because we are still very much in response mode.
Thank
I'm happy
you,
to take
Sarah.
that wave in action.
We've got a out of sync timing, so I may be talking over you. Can I ask a further question, Stephen?
Surely.
Yeah, this was about the viability of care homes and the impact of. I see we're paying 10% premium on the to help them through this difficult period, but if they've got less residents, they must still be struggling. And I just wondered if we had any information on the outlook for care homes viability going forward.
Does Kathy want to respond to this?
Hi, yes, certainly happy to respond to this. Obviously, the COVID pandemic is going to have a major effect on all our care homes, and some of the care homes will be down on their numbers. And it's until that period of time has gone, we will then having to be looking at what we're going to do, because we can't obviously keep lots of care homes open with empty beds. But at the moment, I can't see that being anywhere near, because the pandemic is still very active. It's still carrying on, and we shall be keeping all our reserves and beds as we need them. But yes, in the long term, I'm sure there's going to be a change.
Thank you. Do you have anything to say, Carol?
Sorry about the delay, Chairman. My
I thought we were wending our way through the forest.
feels like it. I would like to just remind members that Margaret Wilcox did a very good paper in the November meeting to give a status report at that time on the market that is residential and other care homes. So that for me is my baseline of where we were then. I think, as Kathy has indicated, it's at the moment people are working to contain and still manage the acute situation, and there will be changes in the future, not least because a lot of the care homes that we have, they have issues that they're going to need to address in the future about having appropriate accommodation for future needs. So I think there will be significant change, but not yet.
And what do we think about the viability of care homes that have to make that change? Will they be able to afford to make the change?
I think it's something we'll need to discuss when we're a little bit further along the track. You'll understand that care homes are private businesses and often multiple businesses. And I'm very much aware that the local care home association, the Providers Care Home Association, is in discussion with all its members about how they're managing now and the potential changes that might have to occur in the future. So it's something that's on people's agendas, but at the moment people are managing the acute phase of COVID.
Okay, thank you. Ian, do you want to ask another question?
I just wanted to comment on that and say, please, could we put this on the agenda for future meetings on a fairly regular basis? I mean, I remember how Margaret Wilcox was quite relaxed about questions we had about the resilience of Gloucestershire care homes in the past, but it's clear from what we've heard today and what we know already ourselves that her confidence, which was based on there being an excess of provision in Gloucestershire, may be true today, but it may not be true a few months into the future. So may I suggest that maybe on a quarterly basis, we review the resilience of Gloucestershire's care homes, whether we are still relaxed about the state of provision as we were, or as Margaret was back in November. That's it.
Yes, that's quite true. We're losing a care home in Tetbury in the very near future. Okay, any more questions? It appears not, Joe. Is that correct?
I have no indication that anybody wants to ask a question. If anybody does want to ask a question, do they want to quickly raise their hand? But I can't see anybody at the moment.
Sarah, will you also mind saying our great thanks to the Adult Social Care Network of carers. They're also doing a sterling job under trying circumstances. Thank you to all of them. Thank you. Now we come on to number 6, the Chief Fire Officer's report. Now I think this gentleman has to make a great apology to us. You know, we've gone through, haven't we? We've gone through apologies, but now, Wayne, you're going to have to make an apology that you're leaving us, which we are seriously very pleased that you've managed to capture this plum job in Berkshire.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just checked that you can hear me because I'm having some terrible.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Good stuff. Okay, I've switched to the phone, so hopefully it works for you. Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to those who've sent congratulations. So I suppose to cover that before I get into the director's report, yes, very thankful and very grateful to be given the opportunity that I've been given with Royal Berkshire, having decided to apply, but a very difficult decision to make to even apply in the first place because of the real positive progress that we're making, particularly with Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service, but you know, as a county council with the response to COVID and particularly for me, I suppose the Community Safety Directorate's contribution to that overall response is really heartening and humbling at the same time. So I have to say it was a very difficult decision whether to apply, but it was one of those professional kind of ambition and career opportunities that probably wasn't going to be available again to me. So I decided to apply and unfortunately was successful. So as I say, I'm very happy about that, but tinged with a bittersweet in terms of the journey we're on. And I think before I move on to the report, what I'd really like to draw members' attention to, and this committee is very well aware of this because you've received the reports. I've spent some significant time now pausing and reflecting on what we've been doing in the last 2 years. And I can honestly say that I think the progress that we've made has been staggering when you list through some of the things, as in, stabilising what was effectively a crisis management situation when I arrived. And then settling a team, 2 restructures, investment by the county council, review of the governance and a change to this scrutiny panel, finance, performance and risk. So changes to the governance and the way we're scrutinised, over 18 audit reports, 118 recommendations, 124 actions arising. Those are over 90% complete. Recruited several new people and changed the structure of the teams, as I say, brought new people into the organisation, and then gone through the HMI inspection, which we knew initially was going to tell us some home truths. There were no surprises, but it still didn't make easy reading. But then to have the follow-up inspections that say, yes, we acknowledge you're making positive progress and moving in the right direction. We've had 2 follow-up business fire safety inspections, one of which I'm getting the feedback for this afternoon at 2 p.m. The first one demonstrated a very positive direction of travel. And then with the work that we've done with organisational development and aligning the values, there were positive comments about the cultural improvements that we were making. And then, of course, we had the COVID inspection, and the COVID inspection was very positive. It was a letter, not a graded judgment, but it was a very positive reflection of the work that the Fire and Rescue Service in Gloucestershire had done as part of the contribution to the overall response to COVID. And it was benchmarked and compared against the contributions that other fire and rescue services have made. And the positivity was overwhelming, and again just really shows how staff have kind of stepped up and played their part in this real kind of team approach and multi-agency role. And that, of course, was supported by additional funding. So a funding cap that was removed in Gloucestershire's case only by the Fire Minister, and he effectively gave us double what we thought we were, only a small amount of money, but it was still double what we thought we could claim. And again, that was based on the contribution and the overall performance that was being made in the fire rescue service. So, and that's all in 24 months. So I think that is a staggering volume of work, and that's yes, okay, partly under my leadership, but that's about the people in the organisation who really just needed that good governance, those good foundations laying, and some clarity around the direction, and then unlocking the potential in the organisation. And in just 24 months, we've seen what the organisation is capable of. So I think, whilst it's bittersweet and I'm excited to move on, I feel like I'm leaving the organisation on some really solid foundations, and I'm absolutely convinced that with good scrutiny, good oversight and good challenge, that Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service and community safety within Gloucestershire will go from strength to strength if it continues in the direction that it's been going. So thank you, Councillor Hurst, for the opportunity to say a few words, and thank you for the support of members over the last 2 years, because it really has been a team effort from the Fire Authority and the members that make up the Fire Authority. That's all of you, the leadership, and they're embracing, a really clear and a dogged determination to drive forward, and then the staff who've made all that happen, really as a team effort. So thank you. You're on mute, Councillor Hurst.
You're still on mute, Councillor Hurst.
So your leadership has been exemplary, Wayne. We really value your influence. But now let's get down to the report. Let's get down to business.
Thank you very much. Very kind. So as Sarah's done, I'll assume that you've seen the report, read the report, and I'll take you to the highlights. I just mentioned the first section, HMI. So we are expecting a full inspection in September, or the autumn of this year. We're expecting it to be September. That will be a full cycle 2 inspection. I think, as I just said, we're building on good foundations, and I expect that to be to show improvement over the previous full inspection. We have had a follow-up inspection 2 weeks ago on one of the areas which was a cause of concern. Well, actually on both, but it's a hard measure on the business fire safety or fire protection cause of concern. My sense at this stage is that inspection went reasonably well. It was a full virtual inspection, so we had to provide electronic evidence to HMI CFRS, and all interviews were conducted virtually, as you'd expect. So I'll be interested this afternoon when I get my initial feedback to find out whether they were able to uncover everything that they wanted to. But the feedback, the informal feedback I've had so far, is that they didn't have any technical issues and they got to speak to everybody they wanted to. So I expect that this afternoon will tell me that we are still moving in a positive direction of travel. And then we look forward to the full inspection, which this time is all of the same inspection criteria as cycle 1. So we will get a very similar inspection, but there is going to be a slightly deeper dive on equality, diversity and inclusion, which obviously links to and supports the people aspect of the HMI CFRS inspection pillars, which are effectiveness, efficiency and people. So we look forward to that in the autumn, because I think that will confirm direction of travel, but there is a lot of preparatory work to do for that. In terms of the improvement board, we have the March improvement board later this week on Friday. Very pleased to say that since this report was produced, we've managed to sign off a particular procedure and policy called the disposal procedure and policy that's part of one of the accounting instructions. And that will clear 16 audit actions that have been outstanding so far. So effectively, out of 124 actions, there will be less than 10 actions outstanding. Now, we anticipated it will be an 18-month journey from the start of the improvement board, which was really December 2019. Just getting my years right. December 2019, because then we lost a year last year for some reason I can't recall. So 2019 we started. So I think we've delivered against those improvement board and audit recommendations. We've delivered against them probably 4 or 5 months earlier than I anticipated we'd be able to, because we maintained a real clear drive and focus on them throughout the response to the pandemic. So again, staff across the organisation, including audit, risk and assurance, strategic finance, corporate services, and then obviously within the fire and rescue service, have absolutely pulled out all the stops to make that happen, and led us to a much more sound footing of good business governance and good internal governance and oversight. So really pleased about that. In terms of business planning, we are deep in the process of developing the 2022 to 2025 Community Risk Management Plan. That's a statutory requirement for the authority to have in place. Members will recall that we put a 1-year interim plan in place for 2021 to make sure that this next plan would align with the County Council's corporate plan, so that we could support those broader strategic objectives. So we are currently out to public consultation on what we call pre-consultation on the makeup of that plan. That will influence, with a lot of data and evidence we are producing, the main content of the plan that will then go out to more formal public consultation in December this year, ready for full council, cabinet and council approval in the February cabinet cycle next year, for full publication from April 2022. So work is well underway with that, and we are hoping between the public consultation and the final draft to run some member workshops to get some member engagement around the contents of that plan as well before it goes out to formal public consultation, and that will be later in the year, summer to autumn. In terms of the community safety team and the work that they're doing, again, I'll assume that you've read the information there. I think the key point is, it's not mentioned in the report, but I'll mention just to support some of the points that Sarah was making earlier about vaccinations. I think the use of Skill Zone and the use of Cheltenham East Fire Station have been a phenomenal success for the fire service, but particularly to support the partnership, the primary care network, public health, and the arrangements we're making to deliver vaccinations to the population across Gloucestershire. Some of the planning and the logistics required to make that happen have been shared with the National Fire Chiefs Council and with other fire and rescue services who've modelled the use of their buildings and facilities and the logistical planning. They've taken a lead from Gloucestershire in order to roll out vaccination and testing centres in other fire and rescue service buildings across the country. So it's I think, a real privilege to be able to be involved in that. And some of the good work that is referenced in there, particularly in terms of the temporary chapel of rest and the management, the very sensitive and delicate management of the deceased throughout the whole pandemic, and also some of the logistics support around vaccinations, is being recognised in the High Sheriff's Awards in a couple of weeks' time, where we've got a handful of fire and rescue service staff who've been nominated and will be receiving High Sheriff's Awards for their contribution to the response to the COVID pandemic. So that's a very nice way for the High Sheriff to recognise those staff as well. I'm sure you'll agree. Lastly, there's a reference to recruitment, just to let members know that we had 965 applicants for our firefighter jobs, which is the highest number we've ever received. We ran quite a comprehensive positive action campaign that was interrupted somewhat because of the flipping in and out of lockdown. Some of those were done physically in a COVID secure environment, and then more lockdown arrangements came in place that meant we had to switch to a virtual approach. So it was difficult to deliver them in the way that we wanted to deliver them, but again, it obviously elicited some good results. So we're currently in the process. We've 5 down to about 200, and as we speak, we're in the process of taking those 200 through an assessment centre. And again, as you'd expect, we're taking a more modern and proactive approach than other parts of the fire sector in that. So the assessment centres we're running at the minute are a values-based assessment centre. So they're about an individual's values. So they take part in group discussions, delivering presentations, and we really get to understand them. And if they are successful at this stage, then we take them through to the physical assessments, whether they have the physical attributes to undertake the role of a firefighter. Most fire and rescue services do that the other way around. But in order to support the positive action, we say no, we recruit for values and train for skills. So it supports that cultural journey that we're on as an organisation as well. So that's really positive and nice for the organisation to get some new firefighters in as well. Moving on to trading standards, you can see there that the point I'll draw your attention to is that the demand on the service was 18% higher in quarter 3 for 2021 compared to 1920. And again, that's generally COVID related, and there are some issues or blockages and bottlenecks around some of the animal health work that team does, mainly due to the lockdown arrangements. Unfortunately, some of that will be eased and they'll be able to get out and do more face-to-face work over the coming weeks. The demand placed on the service in responding to the COVID-related work, particularly working with environmental health colleagues across the districts, means that there has been no capacity to work proactively with businesses and small sole traders. So I know the head of trading standards is liaising with G1 LEP, who are providing quite a lot of support and advice into small to medium enterprise businesses across the county, particularly in relation to the EU exit and the impact on imports and exports. So I know Karen is liaising closely, but at the minute, trading standards aren't able to do any physical work themselves, and obviously that will pick up once the COVID work reduces. Coroners is operating smoothly, as you'd expect. We have had additional pathologists recruited onto the team, that is our generally the key risk within the coroner service is the access and availability to pathologists. Very pleased that the team have been able to increase the number of pathologists who are available to come and carry out post-mortem examinations. So that reduces that risk somewhat. And we're getting some support from the ICT team to try and increase public attendance at virtual coroners' inquests. So again, that's modernising that service and making it more accessible to people. And that is something that will continue beyond the end of COVID, whatever that looks like, to make the coroner's inquest more accessible. Moving on to civil protection team, there's quite a bit of information there. Draw your attention to some of the work that they're involved in around planning. So mass evacuation and shelter, that is being refreshed. The temporary rest centre plan was refreshed early on in the response to the pandemic to make sure rest centres could be delivered in a COVID secure way. And now the mass evacuation and shelter plan is going through the same process, as well as coastal pollution and animal disease, because we've had 2 outbreaks of avian flu reasonably recently. So we're updating the animal disease plan as well. And pleased to say that all of that is being assured through training and exercising, particularly at an operational and a tactical level. So you can see that the Gloucestershire Emergency Support Team is being retrained, and we're recruiting more people into that to make sure that we can operate the rest centres across the county effectively should the need arise. We're taking some reports into corporate leadership team this month, particularly around business continuity management. So there's a new policy being developed to support business continuity management across the county council. That's been presented, or an update to that's been presented at the next corporate leadership team. So if necessary, that will find its way to Cabinet to update members. And if not, it will certainly come through future scrutiny committee so that members can be made aware of the developments there. And we're also doing some work on the emergency management framework, which is how we train, maintain the competence of, and deploy directors on call to respond to events and incidents. And of course, they've all had a hell of a lot of practice in the last 12 months. So you could argue that they are very up to speed and very current. But now what we need to do is lock in that learning and make sure we put it in a continual development cycle. And we've got something in place when new directors join the county council, so they can go through an effective onboarding process, which includes training to manage incidents such as we've been doing for the last year. And that brings me to the end of my report. Happy to take questions.
We've got 3 people wanting to ask questions. Ian, Sean and Jeremy, in that order. Ian.
You really can't keep a good man down, can you? I'd like just to echo the words of the chair in congratulating you on doing such an exceptionally fine job over the past 2 years. So we're very sorry to lose you, but wish you well. I have a couple of related questions. First of all, from my experience, asking senior people to produce exit interview think pieces where they can be quite frank about what has been good and what could be better, I'll put it in those words, are very useful for organisational development. So my first question to you is, will you be taking the opportunity to write an exit interview think piece for the benefit of the County Council? And secondly, and maybe I should be directing this towards Dave Norman, Councillor Norman, is the Chief's job description, which is now being advertised, in any way changed from that of the role that you have delivered so well? So those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dobie. Very kind. Exit interview think piece. It's so new, I hadn't given it thought, but now you've mentioned it, I think it's a cracking idea, and yes, I will be. So I will draft something. And then in terms of the job description, if you don't mind, I'll make comment about that. And then happy, obviously, to hand over to Councillor Norman. I think the job description is broad enough to allow the kind of latitude and flexibility for the Chief Fire Officer, and the delegations are effective in order to allow me to do what I need to do operationally. I think in relation to the broader role around community safety, it's probably content for the think piece around the work that we're doing to improve Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service takes quite a focus, which with the level of resources we've got at the minute means that we can be stretched quite thin in terms of civil protection, trading standards, coroner's service. But I think that's a reflection of the context within which we're having to operate to improve Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service. I think in steady state, when it's at a point where we're all happy with, or certainly the authority is happy with the performance of the Fire and Rescue Service, I think the job description is fit for purpose. It's okay, but probably short term, a little bit more capacity to be able to support the breadth of the work would be useful.
It's good for the Cabinet member then to follow his Chief Fire Officer in response to Councillor Dobie's question. Wayne very kindly told me a few hours before he submitted his application to Royal Berkshire that he was so doing. At that time, I kicked the metaphorical cat that the dogs have in the house, and my wife sort of looked at me and said, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, well, unfortunately, what I thought would happen after appointing a really outstanding Chief Fire Officer just over 2 years ago, and I said then, you will remember, dear, that I said we'll only have him for 3 years. But it's very, very disappointing to me, having built that professional relationship with him, to see him going off and leaving us. But I am fully behind Wayne's move. It's the right professional move for him. I do know Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service very well. It's one of the plum jobs in the country, and it couldn't have gone to a better, more professional and committed Chief Fire Officer than Wayne. In respect of your question, Ian, about what we're going to do moving forward, on the back of what Wayne just said, when he rang me to tell me he'd got the job, I'd already spent those 3 or 4 days in my own mind working out what we should be doing going forward. Within 16 hours of me knowing that Wayne was leaving us, I had established a meeting with the chief executive, and we have started to consider ways forward, jobs specification, person specification, because that needs to be addressed as soon as we can. Wayne is with us till the beginning of June. Whatever we can do in the very short term is all about making those decisions around the right way forward. Because we're on such a good improvement journey, what I'm worried about is there is if you like, some staggering that will be done between Wayne and his successor. But you've got to look at every opportunity in a positive way. And it is a positive way to look at what we've got. Is it right? Does it need any tweaking going forward? And this committee and the council as a whole, for as long as I have this cabinet seat, because of my affinity to the service, I will make sure that we get what we deserve. We'll make the right appointment, hopefully, and the journey will continue.
Thank you, David. Now we have Sean.
Thank you. Well, obviously, first of all, Wayne, thank you for everything which you've done for the county. One point which I've always said, and which I'm still think is key, and which is now very apparent, is the most difficult thing to change the culture. And I think we've seen in the last year that you've achieved that, and that is a huge achievement. Obviously, the way that the fire service has worked for you, and also the way that you led, I think that, as the word you used to me in an email yesterday was that that you can be very proud of the men who you have led, and I think that is a great achievement, and the cultural change is very obvious and been very apparent. So thank you very much for that. Just looking forward, in fact, some of them has been taken forward by Ian's comments, but I wonder if you're in a position to make any comment, or it may be down to Dave, as to we've got this elephant in the room wandering around about the future of the fire service and whether it will stay with the county. My earnest wish is it does stay with the county because of the great benefit it brings to the county, and we've seen that hugely in the last year. But I don't know if you're in a position to make any comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Parsons. I'm sure Councillor Norman is. The facts of what I'm aware of is that there is conversations amongst the National Fire Chiefs Council there, and in events I've been where the Fire Minister's present and he's been talking about his desired future position. Governance is one of his 3 key priorities to look at within the sector. I don't think it's any secret that I think his understanding is that a Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner governance model is probably the most appropriate or the most fitting model. And then what we're waiting for, I suppose, as a fire authority, but also within the fire sector, is the report into the review of the role of police and crime commissioners that was commissioned to start last October. We were expecting it 3rd week of February. It was delayed. I was notified last week that it should have been coming out at the end of last week. And at the end of last week, I was notified it will be coming out yesterday. And I still haven't seen it. So I think it's imminent that we will see some kind of reference to the latest thinking around the role of police and crime commissioners and whether they should be governing fire and rescue services as well. But I'm also led to believe that there's a further review due to take place later this year, and that there is also a ministerial advisory group that is made up of a cross-section of people from the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, the National Police Chiefs Council and the National Fire Chiefs Council, who are advising the Fire Minister on a draft white paper that is due to be placed in Parliament at some point, I'm led to believe, after the election period. So unfortunately, that doesn't answer the question. It's all up in the air. But I think there is quite a clear intention and the direction of travel. Now, what happens locally is the point at which I hand over to Councillor Norman and say, I suppose it depends how the county council and how the local politics want to influence the governance of a locally delivered service.
Thanks, Wayne. I think that's called the hospital pass, isn't it? In rugby parlance. But clearly, we're going into a fight. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think the Fire Minister believes, and I believe totally wrongly, that the 8 different models of governance that exist within the fire and rescue service across the country need to be changed in a mandated way, and that mandated way would be to see that all fire authorities are headed up by a police, fire and crime commissioner. There are two successful PFCCs that are working in the country, and I think those from in my position who know those 2 PFCCs understand why they have been successful in the roles that they've undertaken. For all the reasons that Wayne has given, and the fact that we proved twice through business case submissions that there was no benefit in terms of cost benefit to the residents of Gloucestershire or the improvements of service to the residents of Gloucestershire by passing over the governance of GFRS from the county council to the police, fire and to a police, fire and crime commissioner. I hope the minister will listen to what I believe the vast majority of people in this county believe, and that is this fire and rescue service should maintain its governance within the county council. If it is mandated, then there's almost clearly nothing we can do about it. But I hope we get the chance through consultation to further strengthen the position of why we should remain where we are. We will have to wait and see. Decisions will be taken after the PCC elections this year. Maybe I should say, although certain people might criticise me, make sure you all vote for the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner this coming May.
Chief Shaw.
Okay, now we have Jeremy.
Okay then. Well, thank you, David, for your comment and advice on how to vote. I'm voting for the Liberal Democrat candidate for the Police and Crime Commissioner. That would be my first preference, and you'll find out who that person is fairly soon. But I will agree with you that the fire and rescue service is better if it's maintained and run by a Gloucestershire County Council. It's been doing so since 1974, and I think we know that whenever there's been crises or issues like the pandemic, like with the floods, that our fire and rescue service always seems to do more than anywhere else, and I think we're all very proud of the work that they do. I don't see any need in changing the governance, but it could well be that legislation impacts on that. But I think at a local level, certainly most parties are united on the belief that it should stay in the county council. Question to Wayne, though, and thanks, Wayne, for your service over the last couple of years. We were all expecting you to stay a bit longer, but there you are. there's another job going and you fancied it, so I don't blame you. Maybe it's Dave Norman. Was that the reason? Working with Dave Norman. Some say he's a difficult man to work with at times. But looking at the coroner's service, you mentioned that all members of the team have now received their first vaccination. You also mentioned in your report around how trading standards is not actually doing active work, and the lockdown has had an impact on it, on inspections on food safety and animal safety and stuff like that. I just wonder when we get to them going out again, whether they're going to be receiving their vaccinations ahead of the national tier system. And also, a question to ask is what's the situation with fire and rescue staff, those on the front line, particularly those that might be driving ambulances? Are they getting vaccinated? I wonder how we're protecting our frontline staff to ensure that they get the jab as early as possible.
Thanks, Councillor Hilton. Take those in order. I will put on record it. Councillor Norman is not the reason I am leaving. He's been a very supportive cabinet member. I think we've worked well together. And then in terms of trading standards, all frontline staff really. So we did lobby through the National Fire Chiefs Council alongside the National Police Chiefs Council to get firefighters vaccinated, or vaccinated as a requirement of the frontline role that they're undertaking, and not really just to do with them undertaking COVID-related activities, but for example, they could be delivering first aid or trauma care at a road traffic collision where social distancing, and any COVID secure measures could only be achieved through personal protective equipment and good practice. But I think as the JCVI were working through the protocol, and we were working on certainly the older population, the clinically extremely vulnerable, I think as the clock ticked on and the JCVI got to the point of deciding that they were going to move through the 9 priority categories according to age range, they assessed that would pick up roles like police officers, firefighters, within the age categories as they move through. So the lobbying was rejected and pushed back, and then I think the pace of the vaccination programme overtook the need to move firefighters, police officers, etc., to the front of the queue. There was some challenge, and you may have seen some of that in the media, but I think particularly in Gloucestershire, you can see that the excellent progress made with the vaccination programme in Gloucestershire. A lot of fire and rescue service staff particularly have been vaccinated anyway, either because they fall into one of the categories, and in some cases in the early stages, in order to avoid wasting of vaccines, a small number of people in the very early days, whilst we were smoothing out some of the booking process in the vaccination centres, a small number picked up vaccinations that way. In terms of those who were crewing ambulances, they were given absolute parity with paramedics, and any arrangements put in place for the COVID protection of paramedics was applied to firefighters. So they all received vaccinations in the very early stages of the vaccination rollout to enable them to carry out that role of crewing of an ambulance. In terms of trading standards, same applies. They fall into the categorisation, the priority categories under the JCVI, and will be picked up whenever their category is pulled through for a vaccination. But again, I think Sarah, I was dropping in and out earlier because of IT, but I think I heard Sarah and Councillor Hurst talk about the vigilance required even once you've had a vaccination. So the fact, even if we had a vaccinated trading standards staff, in terms of the lockdown and the access to some of these companies and organisations, there still would have been restrictions in place, and some of those businesses aren't trading or aren't operating. So I don't think it's made a material difference to the vaccination. Certainly hasn't made a material difference to the volume of work that trading standards could carry out.
Thank you, Wayne. Jeremy, do you have anything else to raise while we're at it?
Nothing more, Chair.
Okay. I don't think we have any more questions, have we? Well, thank you, Wayne. Thanks to all your very professional fire staff who work wonders in this time of trouble and pestilence. Thank you very much indeed. We now come on to number 7, the work plan. So if I could hand over to Joe, take us through the work plan. Joe? Famous word. Your mute is a favourite saying in this moment, isn't it? And also, can you hear me? Is another popular saying. You're still mute, Joe.
Sorry about that.
There we are. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I was trying to close a window down and I lost you completely there. Back in the fold. Right. Earlier today, I sent to members just a brief overview of some of the items that members have considered in the past few years, plus a copy of the work plan going forward. If members have noted the items on the work plan, is there anything in particular they would like to change, amend or suggest for the new committee to consider going forward? I noted a couple of things through the meeting from Councillor Dobie, but it's not essential to discuss now. If you want to take it away, email any thoughts to myself. We will be preparing something for the new committee to consider at its first meeting, its induction meeting, that I think Sarah, myself and the team will be looking at induction items and to try and produce something for the new committee, which may be made up of current members, former members and new members of the committee. So it really is an opportunity for this committee to put any suggestions forward that you think might be useful for the new committee to consider. It might be useful for members to put their thoughts forward on work plan issues going forward, on the arrangements for the committee, which I can report that there was a really good response to the review email that was sent out to members of this committee and HOSC. We've got a good, huge response back that I think is going to be shared with members of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee and then Council on the 17th of March. So there is a huge push that the two committees, HOSC and Adult Social Care, reunite as one, whether or not there may be a need for 2 meetings on a bi-monthly basis because of the volume of work that's involved. But there is definitely, from members and officers, the thought that the work of both committees need to be under the one umbrella. So I think if you certainly take note of the conversation or the discussion that's going to happen at the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, and then the discussion at full council on the 17th of March, I think you will see that there is a definite move to join together the work of the two committees. That may take some time. I don't know how long that would have to sort of be processed. It could be later in the year, it could be something for next year, but it's certainly a conversation that's ongoing. So back to you, Chairman. If you want to ask any members if they want to suggest or comment on the work plan review, but if not, then certainly email any comments forward. I don't know if Sarah wants to add anything to that at all about the process for the induction programme. I'm sure it will be quite in depth going forward.
Nothing to add, Joe. That's really comprehensive.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So, does anyone have any comments to say right away about the work plan for the next committee? Or would you prefer to go via email? Email?
I think if anybody wants to comment or send any suggestions in, look more in depth, then please email me and we'll incorporate those into the work plan going forward. Thank you.
Is everybody happy with that?
Sorry, I had to. Yes, I mean I understand the need, the wish to combine. There is a dilemma though. It is a huge workload.
It is.
You know, I mean, the reason it was originally split because it covers such a vast area. So I think that there's going to have to be a lot of thinking through on here. I totally understand this. I totally understand the wish, but I mean, it's quite a difficult problem to make certain that we can adequately cover it without having lots of extra scrutiny meetings, albeit for the one scrutiny. I'll leave it like that because the conversation has to take place as yet and hasn't taken place.
Most definitely. I think the trick is efficient agenda planning, isn't it? Phil? What do you think, Phil?
Oh, sorry, Chair. I didn't raise a hand. I was just shaking my head. I mean, I'm just thinking back to when I was on the HOSC, and the reason things were changed was because that adult social care just purely didn't get what it deserved in that forum. And whilst I respect different members have got different views, I would still have concerns about the adult social care element getting lost in the HOSC, particularly coming out of COVID, etc. But there will be a debate, no doubt. But we only split it up. What was it? 2 years ago we split back.
Yes.
I'd have concerns about trying to make that one big umbrella and the levels of work that would be needed to support it.
The umbrella would become a parasol, wouldn't it?
More like my fishing umbrella, I think. Yeah.
Ian, you want to say something? And then Sarah.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but Sean's really opened this up now. I don't think it's appropriate to get into the discussion of solutions at this stage. But what I would say is we'll have to be ruthlessly efficient in the future if we're going to combine the two scrutiny meetings. And that may even involve dropping some of the things which are currently on the agenda for either the Health Scrutiny Committee or the Social Care Scrutiny Committee, or both. So I really get the point about how it can be unwieldy and there could be a lack of proper scrutiny if there's too much on the agenda, or if the remit of a combined HCOS is huge. So we've got quite a lot of work to do, even if we do decide to combine the two. I'll just leave it there. And
okay.
The points that have been made are well taken. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Sarah.
I just wanted to offer an officer opinion, because this might not be immediately apparent to committee members, that since the committees have been split, Margaret and I, now just myself, along with the cabinet members, have been attending both meetings. And quite often I'm asked to provide updates. I think there's been a frustration, which is a completely understandable frustration on behalf of HOSC members who've wanted to understand more about the public health adult social care response to COVID. So whilst Joe has done a very diligent job of sharing papers, quite often they want to ask me questions. So I think the pandemic has really highlighted that overlap between the two agendas. And I completely accept what committee members have said about giving sufficient time for scrutiny for adult social care, because it is our biggest area of investment as a local authority, and that is only appropriate that we do that. But there's a strong element of duplication that I've found, and I think as officers we can carry on doing that. But I'm wondering if it is the most efficient way to scrutinise these functions, because sometimes it feels like we're being scrutinised twice, being on slightly different questions by two different committees. And I don't know that either committee is aware of what the other committees asked myself and Margaret when she was in post. So there's that duplication element going on at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone wish to make a comment? Are we not trying to solve it now? Ian, is your arm loose?
Stephen, I've had my hand up metaphorically on this little thing. Everybody else has been clicking in and putting theirs and jumping ahead. So I did have something to say. First of all, can we make sure that democratic services in future, when they have late agenda items, they stick them on modern.gov. I don't mind the email coming, but on modern. If you're trying to do it on Blackberry work, you can't do anything with it unless you push it. On modern.gov, you can at least annotate and scribble some notes on it, and you can't do it. So as soon as it sent us an email, put it on modern.gov, please. And can we tell all democratic services officers to do that? Because it's frustrating not to have the document there. As far as I've always thought that there should be a public protection committee specifically dealing with issues about public protection and the fire and rescue service. And I think there's a different agenda there which needs to be looked at. But we're all. I don't think we can decide anything at this point in time, because we've got major elections taking place on the 6th of May. We could well have a new administration with a new corporate agenda and a new way of wanting to operate the scrutiny process. And we might have news. We know that one of the issues we have at the moment is the obsession of the current leader about the number of scrutiny committees that we should have, which is why we've now got overloaded work and it's not balanced. So that might well change, Chair, after the elections. So I think and also the work programming might change after the elections. So I think we really ought to just have our meeting in March, vote through something, then when we get the elections, we'll all be into the negotiations unless one party has an absolute power. But it's the same one. Nothing will change, but it might all change if others take control of this council. And we need to understand that.
Thank you very much, members, for your comments. I'd like to thank you all, members, for your contribution towards adult and social care. Over the years that I've been with you, I've found it superbly interesting, and people really are devoted in getting down to the nub of the problem, and we've been doing that over various issues through the time. So thank you, members, and also thank you, officers, for your fantastic contribution in what's been a tricky area of operation. And we must not miss out, of course, Margaret Wilcox in that, who has since gone elsewhere. Thank you, Margaret. So, thank you all very much for your contributions. All the very best to you, and hope to see you again. Take care.
Thank you, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joe, for looking after us too.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.